The matchmaking form asked for her ideal type, and she left every box blank except one. Available this Saturday, 3 p.m. to midnight. No preference for height, income, hobbies, nothing. Just a man who could stand beside her for 9 hours and help her keep the last shred of dignity she had left. The agency thought it was strange, but they sent her a match anyway, a single father in a coffee-stained sweater who looked like he hadn't slept in days. When she sat down across from him, the words came out before she could stop them. "Can you pretend to be my boyfriend for a day?" She didn't tell him why. Didn't tell him about the wedding invitation still burning a hole in her purse, or the man she'd loved for 9 years who was marrying someone else today. Someone who could give him children. Someone who wasn't broken. The stranger looked at her with tired eyes that seemed to understand too much, and said one word that would change everything. Yes. The coffee shop on Maple Street wasn't the kind of place people came to fall in love. It was where neighbors grabbed their morning fix before work, where college students camped out with laptops, where the Wi-Fi was free and the pastries were always a day old. Jake Morrison had chosen it specifically for that reason. He didn't want romance. He didn't want expectations. He just wanted to meet someone who might understand what it was like to raise a 7-year-old boy alone while pretending everything was fine. The matchmaking agency had seemed like a joke when Tommy first suggested it, his small hands holding up the flyer he'd gotten from school. "Mrs. Patterson says her daughter met someone nice this way, Dad. Maybe you could meet someone nice too." Jake had laughed it off, but 3 sleepless nights later, staring at the pile of dishes in the sink and Tommy's drawing of a family with only 2 stick figures, he'd filled out the form. He'd been honest about everything except one thing. Where the form asked for occupation, he'd written education consultant instead of CEO of Morrison EdTech, the company he'd built from his garage 7 years ago that was now worth $500 million. He'd learned the hard way that money attracted the wrong kind of attention. His ex-wife had loved his ambition right up until the moment she realized that ambition meant 60-hour work weeks and a modest lifestyle because he refused to spend money on things that didn't matter. She'd wanted the penthouse, the country club membership, the designer handbags. He'd wanted to create educational software that could reach kids who couldn't afford private tutors. When Tommy was 4, she'd packed her bags and left a note that said, "I didn't sign up for this." He'd found Tommy crying in his room that night, clutching his mother's empty perfume bottle. That was the moment Jake decided that anyone who came into their lives would have to love them for who they were, not what they had. So here he sat, in his oldest sweater with a coffee stain on the sleeve, waiting for a woman named Rachel Foster who was 3 minutes late. When she finally walked in, he almost didn't recognize her from the profile photo. In the picture, she'd been smiling, her blonde hair catching the sunlight, her green eyes bright. The woman who approached his table looked like someone who'd forgotten how to smile. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her mascara slightly smudged despite obvious attempts to fix it. She wore a simple black dress that seemed too formal for a coffee shop, and she clutched her purse like it contained something dangerous. "Jake?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He stood, instinctively offering his hand. "Rachel, it's nice to meet you." Her handshake was cold, trembling slightly. When she sat down, she didn't order coffee. She just stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her trying to form words that wouldn't come. Finally, she spoke. "Can you pretend to be my boyfriend for a day?" The question hung in the air between them like something fragile. Jake blinked, certain he'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" Rachel closed her eyes, took a breath. "I know how that sounds, but I don't need a relationship. I don't need romance. I just need someone to stand next to me for 9 hours and pretend that I'm not alone. That I didn't spend the last 9 years of my life loving someone who's marrying someone else today." Her voice cracked on the word someone, and Jake felt something twist in his chest. He'd expected awkward small talk, maybe an hour of polite conversation before they both admitted this wasn't working. He hadn't expected raw honesty that felt like watching someone bleed. "You want me to go to your ex's wedding," he said slowly, trying to understand. As your fake boyfriend. She nodded, not meeting his eyes. I know it's pathetic. I know I should just stay home and move on like a normal person. But I promised him I'd be there. He asked me to come, to show that we're okay, that there's no bad blood. And I can't show up alone because then everyone will know the truth. Jake leaned back in his chair, studying her. What truth? Rachel's laugh was bitter. That I'm the woman who wasn't enough, who couldn't give him the one thing his family wanted most, who made the noble decision to walk away so he could have the perfect life with someone who isn't broken. The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back for so long they'd started to poison her. Jake felt his phone buzz in his pocket, probably his CFO with another urgent question about the board meeting on Monday. He ignored it. Something about this woman, about the way she was trying so hard not to fall apart in a coffee shop on a Saturday morning, made everything else seem less important. What happened? He asked quietly. Rachel finally looked at him, and he saw something shift in her expression, as if she was surprised he actually wanted to know. I'm a kindergarten teacher, she began, her fingers twisting together in her lap. I love kids. I've always loved kids. When Daniel and I got engaged, we talked about having 4. A big, chaotic family. The kind where there's always noise and mess and love. She paused, swallowing hard. Then I found out I can't have children. Medical condition, doesn't matter what it's called. The point is, I can't give him what he wants. What his family needs. They have this legacy. This name that has to be carried on. And I'm just a kindergarten teacher from nowhere who can't even do the one thing women are supposed to do. Jake felt anger flash through him, sharp and unexpected. Women aren't supposed to do anything, he said, his voice harder than he'd intended. And any family that would make you feel that way doesn't deserve you. Rachel looked startled, then her eyes filled with tears. You don't understand. It wasn't just them. It was seeing the way Daniel looked at his friends' kids. The way he'd get quiet whenever someone announced a pregnancy. He never said it was my fault, but I could feel him pulling away. So I made the choice for him. I broke up with him and told him to find someone who could give him everything he wanted. She wiped at her eyes roughly. 2 months later, he was engaged to Victoria. 6 months after that, here we are. Jake reached across the table and did something he hadn't planned. He took her hand. Her fingers were ice cold, still trembling. That's not noble, he said. That's heartbreaking. Rachel stared at their joined hands. I just need to get through today. I need to walk into that wedding with someone beside me and prove that I'm fine, that I've moved on, that I'm not the pathetic ex who's still in love with him. She looked up at Jake, her green eyes desperate. Please, I know we just met. I know this is crazy. But the agency said you were kind, that you're a single father who understands what it's like to need help. So I'm asking, can you help me? Jake thought about Tommy, about the way his son had asked him just last night if he was lonely. Sometimes, Dad, Tommy had said, tucking his stuffed bear under his chin, sometimes I see you looking out the window like you're waiting for someone who's never coming. Jake had told him everything was fine, that they had each other, and that was enough. But Tommy had just looked at him with those 2 wise eyes and said, even grown-ups need friends, though. He thought about his ex-wife, about the day she'd told him she couldn't do this anymore. I didn't sign up to be poor, she'd said, even though they weren't poor at all. They just weren't flashy. He'd offered her everything, offered to change, but what he'd really been asking was for her to change, to care about things that mattered more than appearances. She'd left anyway, and he'd spent 3 years building walls around himself and Tommy, determined never to let anyone hurt them again. But looking at Rachel now, at the way she was trying so hard to be brave, he realized something. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was help someone else be brave, even if it was just pretend, even if it was just for one day. Yes, he said, I'll do it. The relief that washed over Rachel's face was almost painful to watch. Thank you, she breathed. Thank you so much. I'll pay you, of course, whatever your rate is. Jake shook his head. I don't want your money. She looked confused. Then why would you agree? He thought about how to answer that. Because I know what it feels like to love someone who doesn't see your worth. Because my son thinks I need a friend. Because something about you makes me want to protect you from the people who made you believe you're not enough. Instead, he said, because everyone deserves someone in their corner, even if it's just for show. Rachel's eyes filled with tears again, but this time she was smiling. We should probably get our story straight. How we met. How long we've been together. Jake glanced at his watch. It was 10:15. The wedding was at 3. We've got time, he said. But first, you need to eat something. You look like you haven't had a meal in days. She started to protest, but he was already standing, heading to the counter. He ordered her a croissant and hot chocolate, the kind with real whipped cream. When he brought it back, she stared at it like he'd handed her something precious. My mom used to make me hot chocolate when I was sad, she said softly. Jake sat back down. Mine too, with the little marshmallows. Rachel took a sip, and for the first time since she'd walked in, some color returned to her cheeks. Okay, she said, setting down the cup. So here's what I'm thinking. We met a month ago. Nothing too serious yet, but serious enough that I'd bring you to a wedding. You're in education, I'm a teacher. That's how we connected. Jake nodded. What do I need to know about Daniel? She flinched at the name but powered through. Daniel Westbrook, 35, runs his family's investment firm. We met in college, dated for 7 years before he proposed. The engagement lasted 2 years because we were waiting for the right time. Then I got my diagnosis, and suddenly there was no right time anymore. Her voice had gone flat, reciting facts like they belonged to someone else's life. His mother, Patricia Westbrook, she's the one you need to watch out for. She never thought I was good enough anyway. Too common, too simple. When she found out about my condition, I swear I saw relief in her eyes. Jake felt his jaw tighten. And Daniel? He just let his mother make that decision? Rachel's smile was sad. Daniel loves his mother, and his mother loves their legacy more than anything. I couldn't compete with that. She picked at the croissant. Victoria is perfect for them. Old money, impeccable breeding, already pregnant. The last word came out strangled, and Jake watched her fight to keep her composure. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. Rachel shook her head. Don't be. I made my choice. Now I just have to live with it. They spent the next hour building their fictional relationship, trading real details mixed with invented ones. Jake told her about Tommy, about how his 7-year-old son was obsessed with dinosaurs and could name every species from the Jurassic period. He didn't tell her that Tommy attended the most prestigious private school in the state, or that Jake had donated an entire wing to their science department. Rachel told him about her kindergarten class, about a little girl named Sophie who'd finally learned to tie her shoes after weeks of trying. She didn't tell him that she volunteered on weekends at the children's hospital, reading to kids who were too sick to go to school. By the time they left the coffee shop, Jake knew her favorite color was yellow, that she cried during commercials with puppies, and that she'd once tried to dye her hair red in college, and it had turned orange for a month. Rachel knew that Jake made terrible dad jokes, that he'd burned dinner so many times Tommy had learned to cook scrambled eggs by age 6, and that his favorite movie was The Princess Bride because it reminded him that true love was worth fighting for. What they didn't know about each other could fill volumes. But as they walked to Jake's car, a modest Honda that had seen better days, Rachel felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she could get through this day. Jake opened the passenger door for her, and she paused. Why do you drive this? She asked, genuinely curious. The car had to be at least 15 years old, held together with more hope than mechanics. Jake shrugged. It runs. That's all that matters. It was a lie, but not the kind that hurt. The truth was, he drove this car because it was the one thing from his old life, from before the money, that reminded him of who he really was. They stopped at Jake's house so he could change into something more appropriate for a wedding. Rachel waited in the living room, taking in the space. It was small, cozy, filled with Tommy's artwork and photographs of Jake and his son at various ages. There was a bookshelf crammed with children's books and science textbooks, a worn couch with a blanket draped over it, and a kitchen table covered in crayon drawings. It looked like a home where people actually lived, not a showpiece designed to impress. She picked up one of Tommy's drawings, a picture of two stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. "Dad and me at the park." Read the caption in wobbly letters. Something in her chest ached. This was what a real family looked like. Not the cold perfection of Daniel's family estate, but this warm, messy, beautiful chaos. "Rachel?" She turned to find Jake coming down the stairs in a suit that had been expensive once but now hung slightly loose on his frame, like he'd lost weight and hadn't bothered to replace it. His hair was combed back, his glasses exchanged for contacts, and for a moment she just stared. He cleaned up well. "Very well." "You look nice," she said, her voice coming out oddly breathless. Jake tugged at his collar uncomfortably. "I hate ties. Tommy says they're like fancy nooses." Rachel laughed, a real laugh that surprised them both. "Your son sounds wise beyond his years." Something crossed Jake's face, a shadow of worry. "He is, sometimes too wise. He knows I'm meeting someone today. He made me promise to be nice." He paused. "He drew you a picture, in case you turn out to be important." Rachel felt tears prick her eyes again. "He doesn't even know me." Jake pulled out his phone and showed her the drawing. It was a stick figure woman with yellow hair holding hands with a stick figure man and a smaller stick figure between them. "He said you sounded sad on the phone. He wanted you to have something to make you smile." Rachel pressed her hand to her mouth. "Jake, I can't take that. This is just pretend." "He doesn't know that," Jake said gently. "And who knows, maybe by the end of today we'll actually be friends." Friends. Such a simple word for such a complicated day. Rachel took the picture, folding it carefully and putting it in her purse next to the wedding invitation. 2 pieces of paper, 2 different futures. One that was ending, one that might be beginning. They drove to the venue in comfortable silence, the kind that happens when 2 people have decided to trust each other, even temporarily. The Westbrook estate was in the countryside, an hour's drive through winding roads lined with trees showing off their autumn colors. Rachel watched the landscape pass, her anxiety building with every mile. "You okay?" Jake asked, glancing over at her. She realized she'd been holding her breath. "I don't know if I can do this." He reached over and took her hand again, keeping his eyes on the road. "You don't have to. We can turn around right now. You don't owe Daniel anything." Rachel looked down at their joined hands. His palm was rough, calloused like someone who worked with his hands, not like Daniel's smooth, manicured fingers. "No," she said. "I need to do this. I need to prove to myself that I can." When they pulled up to the estate, Rachel's breath caught. The grounds were even more elaborate than she remembered, with white tents set up on the lawn, strings of lights already twinkling in the afternoon sun, and enough flowers to stock a florist shop for a year. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, each one worth more than Rachel made in 5 years. She felt Jake tense beside her. "Quite a setup," he said, his voice neutral. Rachel couldn't read his expression. Daniel's family doesn't do anything halfway. They parked at the end of the line of cars, Jake's Honda looking distinctly out of place among the Mercedes and BMWs. As they walked toward the entrance, Rachel became aware of people staring. She recognized some of them, friends from her years with Daniel who'd quietly dropped her after the breakup. Their eyes widened when they saw her, then dropped to where Jake's hand rested on her lower back, protective and steady. The whispers started immediately. "Is that Rachel? Who's that with her?" "I thought she'd be too devastated to come." Jake leaned down and whispered in her ear, "Breathe. I've got you." His breath was warm against her skin, and Rachel felt some of her panic ease. They signed the guest book, Jake's handwriting bold and confident next to her shaky script. Then they were ushered toward the garden where the ceremony would take place. White chairs were arranged in perfect rows, an aisle of rose petals leading to an altar covered in flowers. Everything was beautiful, elegant, expensive. Everything Rachel had once dreamed of for her own wedding. Rachel. She turned at the voice and found herself face to face with Daniel. He looked older than she remembered, more polished. His dark hair styled perfectly, his tuxedo custom-made. But his eyes, those brown eyes she'd once loved, were filled with something that might have been regret. "Daniel," she managed, her voice surprisingly steady. "Congratulations." He glanced at Jake, questions in his gaze. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." Rachel felt Jake's hand tighten slightly on her waist. "I promised I would," she said. "Daniel, this is Jake. Jake, Daniel." The two men shook hands, and Rachel could feel the tension crackling between them. Daniel held on a beat too long, his eyes searching. "How long have you two been together?" Before Rachel could answer, Jake smiled. "Not long, but sometimes you just know, right?" The implication was clear. "I know she's special. Do you?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Right. Well, I hope you enjoy the ceremony. Rachel, maybe we could talk later? I'd like to introduce you to Victoria. I think you two would get along." The suggestion was so absurd, so painfully awkward, that Rachel almost laughed. "Maybe," she said, knowing she'd do everything possible to avoid that conversation. Daniel nodded and moved away to greet other guests. Rachel felt her knees weaken, and Jake immediately guided her to a chair in the back row. "You did great," he murmured. "That was the hardest part." But it wasn't. The hardest part came when the music started, and Victoria appeared at the end of the aisle. She was stunning, all dark hair and grace, her white dress probably costing more than Rachel's entire year's salary. But worse than her beauty was the way she glowed, one hand resting protectively on her barely visible baby bump. Rachel felt something break inside her. That should have been her. That baby should have been hers and Daniel's. That happiness, that future, all of it should have been hers. Except it couldn't be. Would never be. Jake must have felt her trembling because he put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. To anyone watching, it looked like a boyfriend being affectionate. But Rachel knew the truth. He was holding her together, literally keeping her from falling apart. The ceremony was beautiful and excruciating. Daniel's vows about building a family together, about legacy and future, each word a knife. Victoria's promise to give him everything he'd ever wanted, spoken with such genuine love that Rachel couldn't even hate her for it. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife and they kissed, Rachel closed her eyes. Jake's arm tightened around her. "Almost done," he whispered. "You're doing amazing." The reception was in the main tent, tables decorated with more flowers and crystal and elegance. Rachel and Jake were seated at a table near the back, far from the head table where Daniel and Victoria held court. Their tablemates were people Rachel barely knew, distant cousins of Daniel's who eyed her with poorly concealed curiosity. "So," one woman said, her smile sharp, "how do you know the groom?" Rachel opened her mouth, but Jake answered first. "Rachel and Daniel are old friends. We're here to celebrate their happiness." The way he said it, so sincere, so kind, made it impossible for anyone to dig deeper without seeming rude. The woman nodded and turned her attention elsewhere. Under the table, Rachel squeezed Jake's hand in thanks. Dinner was served. Course after course of food Rachel couldn't taste. She moved things around on her plate, smiled when appropriate, and tried not to stare at the head table where Daniel was laughing at something Victoria said. Jake kept up steady conversation, asking their tablemates about themselves, deflecting attention away from Rachel. He was good at this, she realized. Good at reading a room, at making people comfortable. He had the kind of natural charisma that didn't come from arrogance but from genuinely caring about others. Then came the speeches. Daniel's best friend talking about how Daniel had finally found the one after years of searching. Patricia Westbrook, Daniel's mother, standing up with a glass of champagne and a smile like ice. "I always knew my son would find the perfect woman," she said, her eyes sweeping the room and landing briefly on Rachel. "Someone who could give him everything he deserves. Someone who understands the importance of family and legacy." The implication was brutal, and Rachel felt every eye in the room turn to her. She kept her face neutral, but inside she was dying. Jake leaned close, his lips nearly brushing her ear. "She's wrong about you," he said, so quietly only she could hear. "You are more than enough." Rachel turned to look at him, and for a moment, the tent full of people disappeared. There was just Jake, with his kind eyes and his steady presence, looking at her like she was someone worth defending. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I know enough," he said. Then Patricia was finished, and the music started for the first dance. Daniel and Victoria swept onto the floor, moving together with practiced elegance. They looked perfect, like something out of a fairy tale. The song ended, and the MC invited other couples to join. Jake stood and offered Rachel his hand. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. They moved to the edge of the dance floor, far from the spotlight. Jake placed one hand on her waist, took her other hand in his, and they began to sway. He was a decent dancer, not fancy, but solid and sure. Rachel felt herself relax into it, into the rhythm, into the feeling of being held. "Thank you," she said after a moment. "For all of this, for being here." Jake looked down at her. "Can I tell you something?" She nodded. "I lied to you, earlier." Rachel's heart skipped. "About what?" He hesitated, then said, "About my job. I'm not just an education consultant. I own a company. Morrison EdTech. We make educational software." Rachel processed this. The name sounded familiar. "Isn't that the company that donated all those tablets to public schools last year?" Jake nodded. "We believe every kid deserves access to quality education, regardless of their zip code." Rachel stopped dancing. "You're not poor," he smiled ruefully. "No, but I live like I am because I don't want Tommy growing up thinking money is what makes you valuable. My ex-wife couldn't understand that. She left because I wouldn't buy her the lifestyle she wanted." Rachel stared at him. "Why are you telling me this?" Jake's expression was serious. "Because you've been honest with me all day. Because you deserve to know who you're really with. And because when Patricia Westbrook looked at you like you were nothing, I wanted to stand up and tell her that I'm worth 50 times what her son is, and I'd choose you in a heartbeat." The words hit Rachel like a physical blow. "Jake, you don't have to say anything," he said quickly. "I know this is fake. I know after today we probably won't see each other again. But I needed you to know that you're not the broken one here. They are. Anyone who can't see your worth is blind." Before Rachel could respond, a voice interrupted. "May I cut in?" Daniel stood there, his expression unreadable. Jake looked at Rachel, silently asking permission. She nodded, even though her heart was racing. Jake stepped away, and Daniel took his place. They moved stiffly, the ease Rachel had felt with Jake evaporating. "You look happy," Daniel said finally. "I am." It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. "I like him, Jake. He seems genuine." There was something in Daniel's tone, a hint of jealousy that Rachel hadn't expected. "He is," she said. "He's a good man." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry, Rachel, for how things ended, for not being strong enough to fight for us." Rachel looked up at him, really looked at him. "You did what you had to do, what your family needed you to do." "But what about what you needed?" Daniel asked, his voice rough. "What about what I needed?" The song was ending. Rachel could see Victoria watching them from the head table, her expression concerned. "You needed a family," Rachel said softly. You needed children and a legacy and all the things I couldn't give you. And that's okay, Daniel. I've made my peace with it. She pulled away as the music stopped. Congratulations on your marriage. I wish you every happiness. She walked away before he could respond, her vision blurring with tears. She made it to the hallway outside the tent before the sobs came. Jake found her there, leaning against the wall, her shoulders shaking. He didn't say anything. He just pulled her into his arms and let her cry, one hand stroking her hair, the other holding her steady. I'm sorry, she gasped between sobs. I'm sorry. I thought I could do this. You did do this, Jake said firmly. You showed up. You held your head high. You proved you're stronger than any of them. You have nothing to apologize for. Rachel clung to him, this stranger who'd become her anchor in the span of a few hours. I can't go back in there. Then we don't, Jake said simply. We leave. Right now. But people will talk. Jake pulled back enough to look at her. Let them. Rachel, you don't owe these people anything. You came. You showed your face. You proved you survived. That's enough. She looked up at him, at the kindness in his eyes, and made a decision. Okay, let's go. They walked out together, ignoring the stares and whispers. Jake's arm was around her waist, protective and sure, and Rachel felt something shift inside her. She'd come here to prove she'd moved on, to show Daniel she was fine without him. Instead, she'd discovered something unexpected. She'd discovered that maybe, just maybe, she actually could be fine without him. Jake drove them away from the estate, away from the perfect wedding and the perfect couple and the perfect life Rachel would never have. They didn't talk for a while, the silence heavy but not uncomfortable. Finally, Jake spoke. Are you hungry? Real food, not whatever that was back there? Rachel realized she was starving. Yeah, actually, yes. Jake grinned. Good. Because I know a place that makes the best burgers in the state, and I'm pretty sure you could use some comfort food. 20 minutes later, they were sitting in a tiny diner, the kind with red vinyl booths and a jukebox in the corner. Rachel had a burger the size of her head and fries that were crispy and perfect. Jake had ordered the same, plus a chocolate milkshake with 2 straws. Tommy's favorite, he explained, sliding it toward her. Rachel took a sip and nearly moaned. Oh my God, that's amazing. Jake laughed. Right? This place has been here since the 50s. It's the one thing about this town that never changes. They ate in comfortable silence, and Rachel felt the tension of the day slowly draining away. Here, in this small diner with its sticky tables and friendly waitress, she felt more at peace than she had in months. Can I ask you something? Jake said as they finished their food. Sure. What are you going to do now? After today? Rachel wiped her mouth with a napkin, considering. I don't know. Move on, I guess. Really move on this time, not just pretend. She looked at him. What about you? Back to your company. Your double life as a secretly rich guy. Jake smiled. Something like that. Tommy's with my parents this weekend. I should probably go pick him up soon. He'll want to know how the date went. Are you going to tell him the truth? Rachel asked. Jake was quiet for a moment. I don't know. Part of me wants to tell him I met someone interesting, someone brave and kind who taught me that sometimes the best thing you can do is show up, even when it hurts. Rachel felt her breath catch. Jake. He reached across the table and took her hand. I know what I said earlier, about this being fake, about not seeing each other again, but I don't want that to be true. These past few hours with you, even with all the pain and the drama, have been the most real I've felt in years. Rachel's heart was pounding. I can't be in a relationship right now. I'm too broken, too messed up. Then don't be in a relationship, Jake said. Be my friend. Come to dinner sometime and meet Tommy. Let me take you to the park where we feed the ducks. Let us be part of your life without any pressure or expectations. Rachel wanted to say no, wanted to protect herself from more potential hurt, but looking at Jake, at the hope in his eyes, she found herself saying, okay, Yes, I'd like that. Jake's smile was like sunshine. Yeah? Yeah, Rachel said, and meant it. They finished their meal and walked out to the parking lot. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Jake opened her car door, but before she could get in, her phone rang. It was Daniel. She stared at the screen, then declined the call. Not tonight, she said, more to herself than to Jake. Tonight is mine. The drive back to her apartment was quiet, both of them lost in thought. When Jake pulled up to her building, a modest complex in a middle-class neighborhood, he put the car in park but didn't turn off the engine. Thank you, Rachel said. For everything. For being there today. For making me feel like maybe I'm not as broken as I thought. Jake turned to look at her. You're not broken, Rachel. You're healing. There's a difference. She leaned over and kissed his cheek, soft and quick. Good night, Jake. Good night. She got out of the car and walked to her door, feeling his eyes on her the whole way. When she turned to wave, he was smiling. Then he drove away, and Rachel was alone with her thoughts and the ghost of a day that had changed everything. Sunday morning came with rain, the kind that made you want to stay in bed with a book and tea. Rachel did exactly that, curled up under her blanket, processing everything that had happened. Her phone had 12 missed calls from Daniel and 3 from Patricia Westbrook. She ignored them all. Around noon, her doorbell rang. She almost didn't answer it, assuming it was her neighbor asking to borrow something. But when she looked through the peephole, she saw a small figure holding something. She opened the door to find Tommy, Jake's son, standing there with a bouquet of dandelions. Behind him, Jake stood with his hands in his pockets, looking nervous. Hi, Tommy said shyly. Dad said you were sad yesterday. I picked you flowers to make you feel better. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She knelt down to Tommy's level. Thank you. These are the most beautiful flowers I've ever gotten. Tommy beamed. They're weeds, actually, but I think they're pretty. Rachel laughed through her tears. So do I. She looked up at Jake. What are you doing here? Jake shifted his weight. Tommy insisted. He wanted to make sure you were okay. And I. He trailed off, then started again. I couldn't stop thinking about you. About yesterday. About the way you smiled when you took that first bite of your burger, like you were remembering what happy tasted like. Rachel stood, still holding the dandelions. Jake. I meant what I said. I'm not ready for a relationship. I know, Jake said. But you said you'd be my friend. And friends check on each other. So here we are, checking on you. Tommy tugged on Rachel's sleeve. Dad says you're a teacher. Do you like dinosaurs? I love dinosaurs. I know all of them. Want to hear? Rachel looked at this little boy with his gap-toothed smile and his earnest eyes, then at his father, who was watching her like she was something precious. I would love to hear about dinosaurs, she said. Do you want to come in? Tommy raced inside, already launching into an explanation about the difference between a brachiosaurus and a brontosaurus. Jake stepped closer to Rachel. Is this okay? Us showing up like this? Rachel smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Yeah, it is. They spent the afternoon together, the 3 of them. Tommy told Rachel everything he knew about dinosaurs while she made hot chocolate with marshmallows. Jake helped her fix a leaky faucet in her kitchen that she'd been meaning to call a plumber about. They ordered pizza and watched an animated movie about a T-Rex who wanted to be a ballet dancer. It was simple and ordinary and perfect. When it was time to leave, Tommy hugged Rachel tightly. Can we come visit again? He asked. Rachel looked at Jake, who was watching her with something soft in his expression. I'd really like that, she said. After they left, Rachel's apartment felt quieter, but not empty. For the first time in months, she felt something like hope. The next few weeks passed in a blur of unexpected friendship. Jake and Tommy became fixtures in Rachel's life. They'd show up on Saturday mornings with bagels and coffee. She'd join them at the park to feed the ducks, watching Tommy run around while she and Jake talked about everything and nothing. She met Jake's parents, kind people who treated her like she'd always been part of the family. Jake came to her kindergarten class one day and did a presentation on educational technology that had the 5-year-olds completely mesmerized. Rachel started to notice things. The way Jake always made sure she ate when she forgot. The way Tommy would save his best drawings to show her. The way she looked forward to their texts, their calls, their random Sunday afternoon visits. She also noticed that she was thinking about Daniel less. The pain was still there, but it was duller now, more of an old ache than a fresh wound. She'd finally called him back and they'd had a long, honest conversation. He'd apologized again. She'd forgiven him again. And then they'd said goodbye. Really goodbye, in a way that felt like closing a door gently instead of slamming it. One evening, about a month after the wedding, Rachel was grading papers when her doorbell rang. She opened it to find Jake standing there, no Tommy in sight, looking nervous. "Hey," he said. "Is everything okay? Where's Tommy?" Rachel asked, concerned. "He's with my parents. I wanted to talk to you. Alone." Rachel's heart started to race. "Come in." They sat on her couch, the one where they'd watched countless movies with Tommy between them. But tonight, the space between them felt charged with something new. "I need to tell you something," Jake began, his hands clasped together. "And I need you to just listen until I'm done, okay?" Rachel nodded, nervous. "That day we met, in the coffee shop, I thought I was doing you a favor, helping you get through a hard day. But the truth is, you helped me more than I helped you." He took a breath. "For 3 years, I've been going through the motions, being a dad, running my company, pretending I was fine. But I was lonely, Rachel, so lonely. And then you walked in with your broken heart and your impossible request, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had a purpose beyond just surviving." Rachel opened her mouth, but Jake shook his head. "Let me finish. These past few weeks with you have been the happiest I've been since Tommy was born. You make me laugh. You make Tommy light up in a way he never has before. You make my house feel like a home instead of just a place we sleep." His voice dropped. "I know you're still healing. I know you said you're not ready for a relationship. But I need you to know that I'm falling in love with you, Rachel. Not because you need saving, but because you're funny and kind and brave, and you cry during puppy commercials, and you make the best hot chocolate I've ever tasted." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "Jake, you don't have to say anything," Jake said quickly. "I just needed you to know, and I promise, nothing has to change. We can still be friends. I just couldn't keep it inside anymore." Rachel wiped at her eyes. "Can I talk now?" Jake nodded, looking terrified. "That day we met," Rachel began, "I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost my chance at happiness, at family, at everything. And then you showed up in your coffee-stained sweater and your terrible jokes, and you made me feel like maybe I wasn't as worthless as I thought." She took his hand. "These weeks with you and Tommy, they've been a revelation. I didn't know I could laugh like this. I didn't know I could feel excited about waking up in the morning. I didn't know I could love someone else's child as much as I love that little boy." Jake's eyes widened. "Rachel, I'm still scared," she admitted. "I'm scared of getting hurt again. I'm scared that one day you'll realize I can't give you more children and you'll regret choosing me. I'm scared that I'm not enough for you and Tommy." Jake cupped her face in his hands. "You are more than enough. You're everything. And yes, Tommy is my son and I love him more than life itself. But Rachel, I don't need more children. I need someone who makes me laugh. Someone who understands that family isn't about biology. It's about showing up. Someone who looks at my son like he's the most important person in the world." He leaned closer. "I need you." Rachel closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was soft and sweet and tasted like hope and new beginnings. When they pulled apart, both of them were crying. "So," Jake said, his forehead resting against hers, "does this mean you'll be my real girlfriend now? Not just pretend?" Rachel laughed through her tears. "Yes, but you should know, I come with baggage. A lot of it. Good thing I've got strong arms, Jake said, pulling her close. I can handle it. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped up in each other, letting the past finally settle into memory while they held on to the present. Later, when Jake left, Rachel stood at her window and watched his car drive away. She touched her lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss, and smiled. Tomorrow, they'd agreed, she'd come over for breakfast. Tommy would make pancakes because he insisted he was the best pancake maker in the family. They'd probably burn. They'd eat them anyway, drowning them in syrup and laughter. It wouldn't be the perfect life she'd once planned with Daniel. It would be better. It would be real. 3 months later, Rachel found herself back at the coffee shop where it all started. She was meeting Jake for lunch, a Saturday tradition they'd developed. But today felt different. Today, Jake had asked her to meet him there alone, saying he had something important to discuss. She arrived first, ordered her usual hot chocolate, and sat at the same table where she'd once sat broken and desperate. So much had changed since that day. She'd gained a family, a love, a future she hadn't thought possible. When Jake walked in, he had Tommy with him, which surprised her. I thought it was just us? She asked as they approached. Jake smiled nervously. Tommy insisted on being here, said it was important. Tommy bounced on his toes, barely able to contain his excitement. They sat down, Tommy practically vibrating with energy. Jake took Rachel's hand. Remember when we met here? You asked me to pretend to be your boyfriend for a day. Rachel nodded, her heart starting to race. I remember. Well, Jake said, pulling a small box from his pocket. I was wondering if you'd consider making it permanent. He opened the box to reveal a simple, beautiful ring. Rachel Foster, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, Tommy's mom, and the person I get to laugh with for the rest of my life? Rachel couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Tommy piped up. Say yes. Please say yes. I already drew a picture of our family with you in it. Rachel looked at this little boy who'd claimed her heart, then at his father who'd shown her what real love looked like. She thought about Daniel's wedding, about the pain and the loss, and then she thought about all the moments since, the laughter and the healing and the slow building of something real. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. Yes, I'll marry you. Jake slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her while Tommy cheered loudly enough that the whole coffee shop turned to look. The barista started clapping, and soon everyone joined in. Rachel laughed and cried and held on to Jake like he was her anchor in the storm. Because he was. He always had been, from that very first moment when she'd asked a stranger for help and he'd said yes. As they left the coffee shop, Tommy between them holding both their hands, Rachel realized something. She'd come here that day looking for someone to help her say goodbye to her old life. Instead, she'd found someone who'd helped her say hello to her new one. And this life, this beautiful, imperfect, real life, was everything she'd never known she needed. The wedding invitation to Daniel's ceremony was still tucked away in a drawer somewhere, a reminder of the path not taken. But Rachel didn't need reminders anymore. She had everything she needed right here, in the calloused hand holding hers and the little boy chattering about dinosaurs and the future stretching out before them like a promise. Sometimes, she thought, the best love stories don't start with love at all. They start with a desperate question, a kind stranger, and the courage to believe that maybe, just maybe, you deserve a second chance at happiness. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that stranger becomes the person who teaches you that family isn't about what you can't have. It's about who shows up, who stays, who loves you not, despite your scars, but because they've helped shape you into someone strong enough to love again.